The diamond necklace felt heavy around Ruby's neck as she stood in the marble lobby of the Grand Peachtree Hotel. The crystal chandelier above cast rainbow sparkles across her dark skin, and her designer dress hugged her curves in all the right places. She should have felt beautiful, confident, successful. Instead, her stomach twisted into knots as she watched her childhood friend Tiana walk toward her with fire in her eyes. "So this is what you've become," Tiana said, her voice loud enough to make other guests turn and stare. "Ruby from the farm, all dressed up and playing sugar baby for some rich old man." The words hit Ruby like a slap across the face. Several people in the lobby stopped their conversations to watch the drama unfold. A well-dressed woman near the elevator whispered something to her husband, and he shook his head in disgust. "Tiana, please, you don't understand," Ruby started, but her friend cut her off. "I understand perfectly. Look at you. Designer everything, jewelry that costs more than my car, staying in hotels like this." Tiana's voice cracked with hurt and anger. "We grew up together, Ruby. We were supposed to lift each other up, not sell ourselves to the highest bidder." Ruby felt tears burning behind her eyes. This wasn't how she wanted anyone to find out about her new life. She had worked so hard to get here, sacrificed so much, learned so many things. But looking at herself through Tiana's eyes, she could see how it might look wrong. "You were my best friend," Tiana continued, her voice getting louder. "You were supposed to be better than this. Your grandmother would be ashamed." The mention of her grandmother felt like a knife to Ruby's heart. Grandma Rose had raised her with strong values, taught her to work hard and never depend on anyone else for her happiness. But Grandma Rose was gone now, and Ruby was alone in a world that seemed determined to judge her no matter what she did. "How much does he pay you?" Tiana asked, looking Ruby up and down. "How much is your self-respect worth?" A security guard started walking toward them, probably worried about the scene they were making. Ruby knew she had to end this conversation before it got worse. But how could she explain everything that had happened in the past 2 years? How could she make Tiana understand that things weren't what they seemed? "I have to go," Ruby whispered, pushing past Tiana toward the elevator. "That's right, run away," Tiana called after her. "Run back to your rich man and your fake life. But don't ever call me again. I don't know who you are anymore." The elevator doors closed just as Ruby let the first tear fall. As she rode up to the 20th floor, she caught her reflection in the polished metal doors. The woman looking back at her was beautiful, successful, and completely alone. She touched the diamond necklace, remembering the day she had bought it for herself with money she had earned through her own hard work. But would anyone ever believe that? The elevator dinged softly as it reached her floor. Ruby stepped out into the quiet hallway, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Each step felt heavier than the last as she walked toward her suite. Behind one of these doors was the man everyone assumed was paying for her lifestyle. The man who had changed everything. But the truth was so much more complicated than anyone could imagine. Ruby stopped in front of Suite 2015 and pulled out her key card. Her hands were shaking as she slid it into the lock. The green light blinked, and she pushed open the door to find James sitting at his laptop, working as always. He looked up when she entered, and his warm brown eyes immediately filled with concern. "Ruby. What happened? You look upset." She couldn't answer right away. How could she tell him that her oldest friend had just called her a sugar baby in front of a hotel full of strangers? How could she explain that no matter how much success she achieved, people would always assume the worst about a young black woman who had nice things? James stood up and walked over to her, his tall frame filling the space between them. He reached out to touch her face, and she leaned into his hand despite herself. "Tell me what's wrong," he said softly. Ruby closed her eyes and tried to find the words. But all she could think about was how she had gotten here, to this moment, to this life that looked so wrong from the outside but felt so right on the inside. The story of how a farm girl from Georgia became the woman in the diamond necklace was longer and more complicated than anyone could guess. It involved loss and hope, hard work and big dreams, and a love that grew slowly like plants in good soil. But sitting in this expensive hotel room, facing the judgment of her oldest friend, Ruby wondered if any of it had been worth it. She wondered if she would ever be able to convince anyone that she was more than what she appeared to be. The truth was buried under layers of misunderstanding and assumption. And Ruby was beginning to think that maybe the truth didn't matter as much as she had hoped it would. 2 years earlier, Ruby had been a completely different person. She woke up every morning at 5 o'clock to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of bacon frying in her grandmother's kitchen. Their small farmhouse sat on 20 acres of red Georgia clay, surrounded by peach trees and vegetable gardens that had been in their family for 3 generations. "Ruby, honey, breakfast is ready," Grandma Rose would call from the kitchen, her voice carrying through the thin walls. Ruby would pull on her work clothes and boots, braiding her thick hair back to keep it out of her face during the long day ahead. The farm was small, but it took everything they had to keep it running. They grew vegetables to sell at the local farmers market, and Grandma Rose made the best peach preserves in 3 counties. "Morning, Grandma," Ruby would say, kissing the older woman's cheek as she grabbed a plate of eggs and grits. "We got a lot to do today, baby girl," Grandma Rose would say, pouring coffee into Ruby's favorite mug. "The tomatoes are ready for picking, and Mrs. Johnson wants 3 dozen jars of preserves for her daughter's wedding." Ruby loved those mornings, even when the work was hard. She loved watching her grandmother's hands move with practiced skill as she canned vegetables and made preserves. She loved the way the morning sun looked coming through the kitchen window, painting everything golden. She loved feeling useful and needed. But she also dreamed of something more. At night, after all the work was done, Ruby would sit on the front porch with her laptop, using the slow internet connection to take online classes. She was studying business and computer science through a community college program, paying for each class with money she earned from selling vegetables at the market. "What are you learning about tonight?" Grandma Rose would ask, settling into her rocking chair with a glass of sweet tea. "Marketing," Ruby would say, squinting at her screen. "How to help small businesses reach more customers using the internet." "Sounds fancy," Grandma Rose would say with a smile. "You always were the smartest one in the family." Ruby had plans. Big plans. She wanted to help small farms like theirs reach customers directly, cutting out the middleman who took most of their profits. She wanted to build websites and apps that would connect farmers with people in the city who wanted fresh, local food. She wanted to prove that you could honor your roots while still reaching for something bigger. But life had other plans. It started with Grandma Rose feeling tired all the time. Then came the cough that wouldn't go away, and the doctor visits that led to more doctor visits. "Cancer," the doctor said. "Advanced. 6 months, maybe less." Ruby dropped all her classes to take care of her grandmother. She drove her to chemotherapy appointments in the old pickup truck, held her hand during the worst days, and tried to keep the farm running even as her heart was breaking. "You should go to the city, baby girl," Grandma Rose said one afternoon as they sat together on the porch. She had lost so much weight that her clothes hung loose on her small frame. "You got too much potential to waste it out here." "I'm not leaving you," Ruby said firmly. "This farm is our family's legacy." "The farm will still be here," Grandma Rose said, reaching over to squeeze Ruby's hand. "But your dreams won't wait forever." They held on to the farm as long as they could. But medical bills piled up faster than they could pay them, and Ruby had to choose between saving the farm and saving her grandmother. She chose her grandmother, taking out loans and selling equipment to pay for treatments that ultimately didn't work. Grandma Rose died on a Tuesday morning in October, with Ruby holding her hand and the morning sun streaming through the hospital window. Her last words were, "Go make something beautiful of your life, baby girl." The funeral was small but full of love. People from all over the county came to pay their respects to a woman who had fed half the community at one time or another. Tiana was there, of course, crying almost as hard as Ruby was. "What are you going to do now?" Tiana asked as they stood by the grave after everyone else had gone home. "I don't know," Ruby admitted. The farm was gone, sold to pay off the medical debt. All she had left was a small inheritance, her grandmother's recipe book, and a suitcase full of dreams she wasn't sure she still believed in. "You could stay here," Tiana said. "Get a job at the processing plant like me. We could get an apartment together." Ruby looked around at the rolling hills and red clay soil that had been her whole world for 22 years. She could stay. She could get a job and live a simple, safe life. But every time she closed her eyes, she heard her grandmother's voice telling her to go make something beautiful. "I think I need to try something different," Ruby said finally. Tiana looked hurt, but she nodded. "Where will you go?" "Atlanta," Ruby said, the word surprising even her. "I can finish my degree there, maybe find work with a company that does online marketing." "That's a big city, Ruby. It's not like here." "I know," Ruby said, touching the simple gold cross necklace that had been her grandmother's. "But maybe that's what I need." 3 weeks later, Ruby loaded everything she owned into 2 suitcases and climbed onto a Greyhound bus headed for Atlanta. As the bus pulled away from the station, she watched the red clay hills disappear behind her and tried not to think about how scared she was. She had no job, no place to live, and less than $2,000 to her name. But she had something else that money couldn't buy, the memory of her grandmother's hands teaching her to work hard, and the knowledge that love and determination could grow anything, even in the hardest soil. The bus ride to Atlanta took 4 hours, but it felt like a journey to another planet. Ruby pressed her face to the window and watched the landscape change from rural farms to suburban developments to the glittering skyline of the city. Each mile took her further from everything she had ever known and closer to a future she couldn't even imagine. As the bus pulled into the Atlanta station, Ruby picked up her phone and called the only number she had memorized for the city. "Central Community College, how can I help you?" "I'd like to finish my degree," Ruby said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm ready to start over." The Atlanta bus station was nothing like Ruby had imagined. In her mind, the city had been shiny and full of opportunities. The reality was overwhelming noise, crowds of people who didn't make eye contact, and the smell of exhaust fumes mixing with street food and things she couldn't identify. Ruby stood outside the station with her 2 suitcases, trying to figure out which direction to go. She had found a room to rent online, but the address looked confusing, and she didn't know how the bus system worked. Back home, you could walk anywhere you needed to go, or drive the truck if it was too far. "You lost, honey?" asked an older woman sitting on a bench nearby. "Sort of," Ruby admitted. "I'm trying to get to Highland Avenue." The woman looked at Ruby's suitcases and rural clothes with knowing eyes. "You just get here from somewhere small?" "Georgia farmland," Ruby said. "Thought so. You got that look. Highland Avenue is a good ways from here. You need to take the MARTA train to the Virginia Highland station, then walk about 6 blocks. The woman pointed toward a building across the street. "Train station is over there. But honey, let me give you some advice. Keep your head up and your purse close. This city will eat you alive if you let it." Ruby thanked the woman and dragged her suitcases across the busy street, dodging cars that honked at her for not moving fast enough. The train station was confusing, with maps that made no sense and machines that wouldn't take her crumpled bills. After 20 minutes of trying, a teenage boy took pity on her and showed her how to buy a train card. The ride to Virginia Highland took 30 minutes, and Ruby spent the whole time watching the city fly by through dirty windows. Everything was so big, so fast, so different from home. She saw homeless people sleeping under bridges, buildings that stretched so high she couldn't see the tops, and more people than she had ever seen in one place. When she finally found the house on Highland Avenue, her heart sank. The online photos had made it look charming and cozy. In reality, It was a run-down building with peeling paint and a yard full of weeds. Her private room turned out to be a tiny space with no windows, just big enough for a twin bed and a small dresser. "Rent is due every Friday," said her landlord, a thin man who smelled like cigarettes. "No cooking in the rooms, no guests after 10, no loud music ever. Break the rules, you're out." Ruby paid him 4 weeks' rent in cash, watching her savings disappear. She had barely enough left for food and bus fare, and she still needed to register for classes and find a job. That first night, lying on a mattress that creaked every time she moved, Ruby called Tiana. "How's the big city?" Tiana asked, and Ruby could hear the doubt in her voice. "It's different," Ruby said, not wanting to admit how scared she was. "You could still come home, you know. There's a job opening at the plant. Benefits and everything." Ruby looked around her tiny, windowless room and almost said yes. But then she remembered her grandmother's words about making something beautiful of her life. "I'm going to give it a real try," Ruby said. "I just need some time to figure things out." The next morning, Ruby walked to Central Community College to register for classes. The campus was bigger than her entire hometown, with buildings that looked like they belonged in a movie. Students hurried past her wearing clothes that probably cost more than she had spent on clothing in her entire life. "I'd like to finish my business degree," Ruby told the woman at the registration desk. "Do you have your transcripts from your previous school?" Ruby handed over the paperwork she had brought with her. The woman looked it over with a frown. "I see you have some credits, but you'll need to take placement tests before we can determine what classes you still need. Also, I see you're applying for financial aid. Did you fill out your FAFSA?" "My what?" "Financial aid application. You can't get student loans or grants without it." Ruby spent the next 3 hours filling out forms that asked questions she didn't understand about tax returns and family financial information. When she finally finished, the woman told her it would take 6 weeks to process her application. "What am I supposed to do for 6 weeks?" Ruby asked. "Wait," the woman said with a shrug. "Or pay out of pocket if you can afford it." Ruby couldn't afford it. She walked out of the college feeling more lost than ever. Her next stop was looking for work. She had brought her resume, which listed her experience helping run the farm, her online classes, and her skills with computers and social media. She thought it was pretty good, but the first 5 places she applied barely looked at it. "Do you have any restaurant experience?" asked the manager at a chain coffee shop. "No, but I learn fast, and I'm good with people." "Sorry, we need someone with experience." "Do you have any retail experience?" asked the manager at a clothing store. "No, but, sorry." By the end of the first week, Ruby had applied to 20 jobs and gotten 0 calls back. Her money was running low, and she was eating nothing but peanut butter sandwiches and bananas. She was starting to understand what the woman at the bus station had meant about the city eating people alive. Finally, after 2 weeks of rejections, she got a call from a small coffee shop near the college campus. "Can you start tomorrow?" asked the owner, a stressed-looking woman named Beth. "My morning shift person just quit with no notice." "Yes," Ruby said quickly, not even asking about the pay. The coffee shop was called Been There, Done That, and it was the kind of place where college students came to study and local artists displayed their paintings on the walls. Ruby's job was to take orders, make basic coffee drinks, and clean tables. The pay was minimum wage plus tips, which wasn't much, but it was something. Her first day was a disaster. She didn't know how to work the espresso machine, she mixed up orders, and she spilled hot coffee on herself twice. But Beth was patient, and Ruby was determined to learn. "You're trying hard," Beth said at the end of the shift. "That counts for something." Ruby worked 6 days a week, standing on her feet for 8 hours a day, making coffee for people who often didn't say thank you. Her feet hurt constantly, her back ached, and she went to bed every night exhausted. But slowly, she started to get better at the job. She learned to make perfect lattes, she memorized regular customers' orders, and she even started to enjoy talking to people. The tips were small, but they added up. Ruby saved every penny she could, eating cheap food and walking everywhere to save bus fare. After 6 weeks, her financial aid finally came through, and she was able to register for 2 classes, Advanced Business Marketing and Web Design. She went to school in the mornings and worked at the coffee shop in the afternoons and evenings. It was exhausting, but for the first time since arriving in Atlanta, Ruby felt like she was moving forward instead of just surviving. One evening, as she was cleaning tables after closing time, Beth sat down across from her. "You know, I've been watching you," Beth said. "You're not like the other kids who work here. You're older, more serious. What's your story?" Ruby told her about the farm, about her grandmother, about her dreams of connecting farmers with city customers. "That's a great idea," Beth said. "I struggle to find good local suppliers for our pastries and food. Most of the farmers I know don't have websites or any way to reach businesses like mine." "Really?" Ruby said, looking up from the table she was wiping. "Really? If you ever figure out how to make that business idea work, I'd love to be your first customer." That night, Ruby went back to her tiny room and opened her laptop. For the first time in months, she started working on her business plan again. Maybe the city wasn't going to eat her alive after all. She could find a way to grow something beautiful here, just like her grandmother had taught her to do back home. Ruby had been working at Bean there, done that for 3 months when everything changed. It was a busy Tuesday morning, and the coffee shop was packed with college students cramming for midterm exams. Ruby moved behind the counter with practiced efficiency, calling out drink orders and handling the long line of caffeine-desperate customers. "Large coffee, black, and a blueberry muffin," she called out, setting the order on the pickup counter. A tall man in a well-tailored suit stepped forward to collect his order. Ruby noticed him because he was different from their usual customers. While most people who came in wore jeans and hoodies, this man looked like he belonged in a boardroom. He was black, probably in his early 30s, with kind eyes and an easy smile. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was warm and polite. "I haven't seen you here before. Are you new?" "I've been here 3 months," Ruby said, already working on the next order. "But I work mostly afternoons. This is my first morning shift. I'm here every Tuesday and Thursday morning," he said. "I'm James, by the way." "Ruby," she said, glancing up at him briefly before focusing back on the espresso machine. James didn't leave right away like most customers did. Instead, he found a table near the counter and pulled out his laptop. Ruby noticed he kept looking in her direction, but not in a creepy way. More like he was curious about something. Around 10 o'clock, the morning rush died down, and Ruby finally had a chance to catch her breath. James was still at his table, typing away at his computer and occasionally taking phone calls that sounded important. "Excuse me," James said, walking back up to the counter. "Could I get another coffee? And maybe ask you a question?" "Sure," Ruby said, refilling his cup. "What's your question?" "I couldn't help but overhear you talking to that customer earlier about local farms. You mentioned something about helping farmers connect with city restaurants." Ruby's cheeks warmed. She had been talking to a regular customer about her business ideas while making his drink. She didn't realize anyone else had been listening. "Oh, that," she said, feeling embarrassed. "I was just thinking out loud. It's probably a silly idea." "Actually, it sounds brilliant," James said. "I work in technology consulting, and I've been looking for innovative business ideas exactly like that one. Would you mind if I asked you more about it?" Ruby looked around the coffee shop. There were only a few customers left, and Beth was in the back office doing paperwork. She had a few minutes to talk. "I grew up on a farm," Ruby said, wiping down the counter as she spoke. Small farmers have amazing products, but they struggle to reach customers beyond their local area. Meanwhile, restaurants and grocery stores in the city want fresh, local ingredients but don't know how to connect with farmers directly. So you're thinking about creating a platform that connects them? James asked, leaning forward with interest. Exactly. Like a website and app where farmers can list their products, and restaurants can browse and order directly. No middleman taking huge cuts, better prices for everyone, fresher food for customers. James nodded thoughtfully. That's a huge market opportunity. The farm-to-table movement is growing fast, but you're right that the technology infrastructure isn't there yet. Ruby felt a flutter of excitement. This was the first time anyone had taken her idea seriously besides Beth. The problem is, I don't know enough about technology yet, Ruby admitted. I'm taking web design classes, but building something like that would require skills I don't have. What if I told you that skills can be learned? James said. I've seen people with great business ideas succeed even when they started with limited technical knowledge. Really? Really? The most important part is understanding the problem you're trying to solve, and you clearly understand that better than most people. James pulled out a business card and handed it to her. I'm the founder of a tech consulting company. We help businesses develop digital strategies and build technology solutions. Ruby looked at the card. It was simple and elegant, with James's name and the company name, Growth Solutions Technology. I have a proposition for you, James said. I'm always looking for smart people who understand real business problems. What if you came to work for me part-time? You could learn about technology and business development while helping my other clients. And in your spare time, you could work on your farming platform idea. Ruby stared at him. Are you serious? Completely serious. I've been watching you work this morning. You're efficient, you pay attention to details, you're good with customers, and you think about business problems in creative ways. Those are exactly the skills I need. But I don't have any experience in technology consulting, Ruby said. Everyone starts somewhere, James said. I didn't have any experience when I started my company either. I just had good ideas and the willingness to work hard to make them happen. Ruby felt her heart racing. This was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed about but never thought would actually happen. What would the job involve, she asked. Research, client communication, project coordination, some basic analysis work. I'd teach you as we go. The pay would be $15 an hour to start, with raises based on performance. Flexible schedule so you can keep taking classes. $15 an hour was more than double what she made at the coffee shop. Ruby tried to keep her expression calm, but inside she was jumping up and down. When would I start? She asked. How about next Monday? That gives you time to give notice here if you want to take the job. Ruby looked around the coffee shop. She loved working for Beth, and she would miss the regular customers. But this was the chance she had been working toward. I'd like to try it, she said. James smiled. Great. Here's what we'll do. Come to my office Monday morning at 9, and I'll show you around. We'll start with some basic projects and see how it goes. If it's a good fit for both of us, we'll make it permanent. He wrote his office address on the back of his business card. And Ruby? Bring your business plan for the farming platform. I'd like to take a look at it. After James left, Ruby called Beth into the front of the shop. I might have some good news and some bad news, Ruby said. Beth listened as Ruby explained about the job offer. When she finished, Beth was quiet for a moment. The bad news is I'm going to miss having you here, Beth said finally. The good news is this sounds like exactly what you've been working toward. Are you sure you're not mad? Honey, I've been running this coffee shop for 10 years. I've seen a lot of young people come and go. Most of them are just passing time, but you've been building towards something. I'm proud of you for taking this chance. That night, Ruby called Tiana to share the news. A technology consulting job? Tiana said. Ruby, are you sure this guy is legitimate? It sounds too good to be true. I looked up his company online. It's real, and he has good reviews from clients. I just worry about you, Tiana said. Big city guys can be smooth talkers. I'll be careful, Ruby promised. But Tiana, this could be my chance to actually build the business I've been dreaming about. After she hung up, Ruby opened her laptop and pulled up the business plan she had been working on. She had pages of notes about how the farming platform would work, what features it would need, how much it might cost to build. For the first time, it felt like more than just a dream. She thought about her grandmother, who had always told her that opportunities came to people who were ready for them. Ruby had been working to get ready for 3 months, taking classes, saving money, learning about the city and how business worked here. Maybe this was her grandmother's way of looking out for her from heaven. Maybe all the hard times had been preparing her for this moment. Ruby stayed up late that night, polishing her business plan and researching everything she could about James's company. By morning, she felt ready to take the next step toward making something beautiful of her life. Ruby's first day at Growth Solutions Technology started with her standing outside a sleek office building in Midtown Atlanta, checking the address on James's business card 3 times. The building was all glass and steel, reflecting the morning sun like a mirror. Through the lobby windows, she could see marble floors and modern furniture that probably cost more than she used to make in a year at the farm. She took a deep breath and walked through the revolving doors, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Ruby had bought her first business outfit the weekend before, a simple black dress and low heels from a discount store. It wasn't fancy, but it was professional, and it made her feel more confident. I'm here to see James Richardson, she told the security guard at the front desk. 16th floor, suite 1640, he said, handing her a visitor's badge. The elevator ride felt like it took forever. Ruby watched the floor numbers climb and tried to calm her nerves. She had never worked in an office before, never had a job that required her to think instead of just following instructions. What if she wasn't smart enough? What if James realized he had made a mistake? The elevator doors opened to reveal a modern office space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Ruby could see for miles highways snaking between buildings, construction cranes reaching toward the sky, and in the distance, the green hills that reminded her of home. Ruby. James appeared from around a corner, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt. He looked more relaxed than he had in his suit at the coffee shop. Welcome to Growth Solutions. How are you feeling? Nervous, Ruby admitted. That's normal. Let me show you around. The office was smaller than Ruby had expected, but everything was clean and modern. There were 6 workstations with large computer monitors, a conference room with a big screen for presentations, and a kitchen area with coffee that smelled much better than what they served at Been There, Done That. We're a small company, James explained as they walked. Right now it's just me, my business partner Lisa, and 2 part-time contractors. You'll be our first full-time employee besides us. What exactly does Growth Solutions do? Ruby asked. We help businesses figure out how to use technology to grow faster and serve customers better, James said. Some clients need websites, some need apps, some need help understanding their data. We figure out what they need and then either build it ourselves or connect them with specialists who can help. He led her to a workstation near the window. This will be your desk. We got you a laptop and set up all the software you'll need. Your first project is to research potential clients for a marketing campaign we're planning. James spent the next 2 hours teaching Ruby how to use the company's research tools and databases. He showed her how to find information about businesses, how to analyze their online presence, and how to identify opportunities where Growth Solutions might be able to help them. The key is to understand each business's specific challenges, James explained. A restaurant has different technology needs than a law firm or a retail store. Our job is to match solutions to problems. Ruby found the work fascinating. She had always been good at seeing patterns and solving problems, but she had never applied those skills to business strategy before. As she researched different companies, she started to see how technology could help them in ways they probably hadn't even considered. Around noon, James's business partner Lisa arrived. She was a petite woman with short natural hair and an energy that filled the room as soon as she walked in. "So you're the famous Ruby," Lisa said, walking over to shake her hand. "James has been talking about your farming platform idea all week. You told her about that?" Ruby asked James, feeling embarrassed. "Of course I did. It's a great idea, and Lisa has experience with agricultural technology. I worked for a company that built supply chain software for food distributors," Lisa explained. "The biggest challenge in that industry is connecting all the different players: farmers, distributors, restaurants, grocery stores. Your platform could solve a lot of those problems." Over lunch, the three of them talked about Ruby's business plan. Lisa asked detailed questions about how the platform would work, what features farmers would need most, and how they could make money while keeping costs low for users. "The biggest challenge will be getting both sides to adopt the platform at the same time," Lisa said. "Farmers won't sign up if there aren't restaurants looking for their products, and restaurants won't sign up if there aren't farmers offering what they need. That's called the chicken and egg problem," James added. "It's common with marketplace businesses. You need a strategy for building both sides of the market simultaneously." Ruby took notes on everything they discussed. She had never thought about business strategy in such detail, but the conversation gave her new ideas about how to make her platform successful. That afternoon, James taught Ruby how to use project management software to track client work and deadlines. He showed her how to write professional emails, how to research industry trends, and how to create presentations that would help clients understand complex technology concepts. "The most important thing to remember is that we're not just selling technology," James said. "We're selling solutions to real business problems. Technology is just the tool." Ruby's first week flew by in a blur of learning. She researched potential clients, attended meetings where James and Lisa discussed strategy with existing clients, and started to understand how technology businesses really worked. Every day brought new challenges and new knowledge. On Friday afternoon, James asked her to stay after Lisa left for the day. "How has your first week been?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Amazing," Ruby said honestly. "I've learned more in 5 days than I learned in months at the coffee shop." "Good. I wanted to talk to you about your farming platform idea. I've been thinking about it a lot." Ruby felt her stomach flutter with nervousness and excitement. "I think you have something really valuable," James continued. "But building a platform like that is a big project. It would require significant time and money to do it right." Ruby's heart sank. Was he about to tell her the idea wasn't practical? However, James said, "I'd like to propose something. What if Growth Solutions became your partner in developing the platform? We provide the technical expertise and startup capital, you provide the industry knowledge and business vision. We split the ownership and any profits that come from it." Ruby stared at him. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. Lisa and I have been looking for the right opportunity to develop our own product instead of just doing client work. Your platform could be exactly what we've been waiting for. But I don't have any money to invest," Ruby said. "You don't need money. You have something more valuable. You understand the problem we're trying to solve better than anyone else. That's worth more than cash." Ruby felt tears starting to form in her eyes. 6 months ago, she had been struggling to keep her grandmother's farm alive. Now she was sitting in a modern office, being offered a partnership in a technology company. "I need to think about it," she said, though her heart was already saying yes. "Of course. Take your time. But Ruby, I want you to know that I believe in this idea, and I believe in you. You have instincts for business that can't be taught. That weekend, Ruby walked around the city thinking about James's offer. She called Tiana, who was skeptical about the whole thing. "It sounds too good to be true," Tiana said. "What if they're just trying to steal your idea?" "James could have stolen the idea already if he wanted to," Ruby pointed out. "He's asking me to be a partner, not an employee." "I just don't want you to get hurt," Tiana said. Ruby understood her friend's concern, but she also knew this was the opportunity she had been working toward. Her grandmother had always told her that when the right door opened, she needed to be brave enough to walk through it. On Monday morning, Ruby walked into the office with her answer. "I want to do it," she told James. "I want to build this platform together." James smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. When do we start?" "How about right now?" Ruby said. And that's exactly what they did. 6 months later, Ruby barely recognized her own life. She stood in the same office where she had started as a nervous research assistant, but now she was presenting their farming platform prototype to a room full of potential investors. The platform had a name now, Farm Connect, and it was more sophisticated than anything Ruby had imagined when she first had the idea. Farm Connect currently has 43 farms and 27 restaurants registered in the Atlanta area, Ruby told the group of 5 investors seated around the conference table. "Our beta test showed that farmers increased their direct sales by an average of 35%, while restaurants reduced their supply costs by 15%. The investors asked detailed questions about market size, revenue projections, and competition. Ruby answered each one confidently, drawing on months of research and real-world testing. She had learned to speak the language of business, to think in terms of metrics and growth strategies. "What's your background, Ruby?" asked one investor, a woman in her 50s who ran a venture capital fund focused on agricultural technology. "I grew up on a small farm in rural Georgia," Ruby said. "I understand the challenges farmers face because I lived them. That's what makes our platform different from other agricultural tech companies." After the investors left, promising to have an answer within a week, Ruby collapsed into her chair, exhausted but exhilarated. "You were amazing," James said, sitting on the edge of her desk. 6 months ago, you had never given a business presentation in your life." 6 months ago, I didn't even know what a venture capital fund was," Ruby laughed. The transformation had been gradual but dramatic. As Farm Connect developed from an idea into a real product, Ruby had thrown herself into learning everything she could about technology, business development, and startup management. James and Lisa had been patient teachers, but Ruby's natural intelligence and work ethic had driven most of her growth. She had learned to code basic websites, to analyze user data, to write business plans that investors would take seriously. She had traveled to farms across Georgia and Alabama, talking to growers about their needs and frustrations. She had visited restaurants in Atlanta, Birmingham, and Nashville, understanding how chefs and restaurant owners thought about sourcing ingredients. "The best part is seeing it actually work," Ruby said, pulling up Farm Connect on her computer. The website was clean and professional, vegetables and smiling farmers. The farmer profiles told stories about family farms and sustainable growing practices, while the restaurant section showcased local chefs who cared about fresh, local ingredients. "Look at this," Ruby said, clicking on a success story feature. "Remember Sarah, the organic farmer from Decatur? She said Farm Connect helped her double her income this year. She's hiring 2 part-time workers and expanding her greenhouse operation." James looked over her shoulder at the screen. "And this restaurant," he said, pointing to another story. "They went from buying all their produce from a big distributor to getting 60% of their vegetables directly from local farms." Ruby had started tracking these success stories because they reminded her why Farm Connect mattered. It wasn't just about building a successful business, it was about helping people like her grandmother, farmers who worked hard but struggled to find markets for their products. The financial side of Farm Connect was working too. The platform took a small percentage of each transaction, which was adding up to real revenue as more farmers and restaurants joined. Ruby was earning more money than she had ever imagined possible, but more importantly, she was building something that would last. With her increased income, Ruby had moved out of her tiny room on Highland Avenue and into a nice one-bedroom apartment in Virginia Highland. The apartment had big windows, a real kitchen, and enough space for a home office where she could work on Farm Connect in the evenings. She had also started to build a wardrobe of professional clothes that made her feel confident in business meetings. Not expensive designer outfits, but quality pieces that fit well and projected competence. The diamond necklace that had caused so much trouble later had been her first real indulgence, a gift to herself when Farm Connect reached 50 registered users. "I keep thinking about what my grandmother would say if she could see this," Ruby said, closing her laptop. "What do you think she would say?" James asked. "She'd probably tell me to stay humble and remember where I came from," Ruby said with a smile. "But I think she'd be proud that I'm helping farmers." James was quiet for a moment. Over the months of working together, their relationship had evolved from professional to something more personal. They spent long hours together developing Farm Connect, and Ruby had come to appreciate not just James's business skills, but his kindness, his patience, and his genuine desire to build something meaningful. "I think she'd be proud of a lot more than that," James said softly. Ruby felt a flutter in her stomach. There had been moments over the past few months when she sensed something developing between them, but they had both been careful to keep things professional. Farm Connect was too important to risk complicating it with personal relationships. "James," Ruby started to say, but her phone rang, interrupting the moment. "Ruby, this is Margaret Chen from Sustain Tech Ventures," said the voice on the other end. Margaret was the investor who had asked about Ruby's background. "Hi, Margaret. Do you have news about our proposal?" "I do. We'd like to move forward with an investment. Can you and James come to our office tomorrow to discuss terms?" Ruby looked at James, who had heard enough to understand what was happening. He was grinning and giving her a thumbs up. "Yes, we can definitely be there tomorrow," Ruby said, trying to keep her voice professional despite wanting to jump up and down. After she hung up, James swept her into a hug that lifted her off the ground. "We did it," he said. "We actually did it." Ruby hugged him back, feeling the warmth of his arms around her and the solid reality of their success. Farm Connect was going to get the funding it needed to expand beyond Atlanta, to help farmers and restaurants across the Southeast. When James set her down, they were standing very close together. Ruby could see the excitement in his eyes, and something else that made her heart race. "Ruby," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "This partnership has been the best thing that's ever happened to me, professionally and personally. I'm grateful every day that you walked into that coffee shop." "James. I know we said we'd keep things professional, but I can't pretend anymore that I don't have feelings for you." Ruby felt her breath catch. She had been fighting the same feelings for months, telling herself that mixing business with romance was too risky. "I have feelings for you too," she admitted. "But I'm scared of messing up what we've built together." "What if we don't mess it up?" James said. "What if we're careful and honest with each other? What if we try?" Ruby thought about her grandmother's advice about being brave when the right doors opened. She had taken a chance on moving to Atlanta, on working for James, on building Farm Connect. Maybe it was time to take a chance on love too. "Okay," she said. "Let's try." James smiled and leaned down to kiss her softly. It was a perfect moment, the taste of success, the promise of love, and the knowledge that she had built something beautiful with her own hands and heart. As they left the office that evening, walking hand in hand toward Ruby's apartment, she felt like her life was finally coming together in ways she had never dared to imagine. The scared farm girl who had arrived in Atlanta with 2 suitcases was gone, replaced by a confident businesswoman who was ready to take on the world. But Ruby didn't know that her happiness was about to be tested in ways she couldn't predict. Success had a way of attracting attention, and not all of that attention would be welcome. Ruby's new life came with invitations to events she had never imagined attending. When the Atlanta Business Journal named her one of 30 under 30 rising entrepreneurs, she found herself at a networking dinner surrounded by successful business owners, investors, and community leaders. She wore a midnight blue dress that she had bought specifically for the occasion, paired with small diamond earrings that caught the light when she moved. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo that took her an hour to perfect with YouTube tutorials. Ruby felt beautiful and confident as she mingled with other honorees, discussing their businesses and sharing advice. "So you're the young woman who's revolutionizing farm-to-table supply chains," said Robert Kingston, a well-known real estate developer who was probably 30 years older than Ruby. "Very impressive for someone so young." "Thank you," Ruby said, accepting the compliment gracefully. "Farm Connect has been a team effort, but I'm proud of what we've accomplished." "I'd love to hear more about your business model," Robert said, moving closer to her. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation over dinner sometime." Ruby recognized the look in his eyes and the tone in his voice. This wasn't about business networking. "That's very kind, but my schedule is pretty packed right now," Ruby said politely, taking a step back. "Come now, a successful young woman like yourself needs to make time for the right connections," Robert persisted. "I could introduce you to some very influential people." Before Ruby could respond, James appeared at her side. "Ruby, there you are," he said, placing a protective hand on her lower back. "The photographer from the Business Journal wants to get a picture of all the honorees." "Of course," Ruby said gratefully. "Mr. Kingston, it was nice meeting you." As they walked away, James leaned down to whisper in her ear. "Was that guy bothering you?" "He was being persistent," Ruby said. "Thanks for the rescue." "Always," James said, squeezing her hand briefly. But Ruby noticed that several people at the event watched their interaction with interest. She saw women whispering to each other while glancing in her direction, and she caught fragments of conversations that made her uncomfortable. So young to be so successful. Wonder how she really got the funding. Pretty girl like that, there's always more to the story. Ruby tried to ignore the whispers and focus on the legitimate business conversations she was having. She met several potential clients for Farm Connect, exchanged business cards with other entrepreneurs, and even scheduled a follow-up meeting with a woman who ran a sustainable food distribution company. But the suspicious looks and whispered comments followed her throughout the evening. Ruby began to realize that some people couldn't believe a young black woman from a farm background could achieve this level of success through legitimate means. The gossip got worse when local business publications started writing about Farm Connect's success. A profile in Atlanta Business Chronicle included a photo of Ruby at her desk, wearing professional attire and smiling confidently. The article accurately described her background and the development of Farm Connect, but the online comments were brutal. "Young girl from nowhere gets millions in funding. Something doesn't add up. Pretty obvious how she really got her investment money. Another diversity hire success story. Let's see how long it lasts." Ruby tried not to read the comments, but they were hard to avoid. James and Lisa both tried to shield her from the worst of it, but Ruby could see the anger in their eyes when they thought she wasn't looking. "People are just jealous," Lisa said during a team meeting where they discussed the publicity. "Success always attracts haters." "I know," Ruby said, but the comments still hurt. She had worked so hard to build Farm Connect legitimately, to prove herself through results rather than connections or shortcuts. The rumors reached a new level when Ruby started attending high-profile business events with James. As Farm Connect grew, they were invited to launch parties for other startups, venture capital mixers, and industry conferences. These events were important for networking and building partnerships, but they also put Ruby's personal life under scrutiny. She and James had been careful about their relationship, keeping it separate from their business partnership. At work, they maintained professional boundaries and made decisions based on what was best for Farm Connect. But outside the office, they were falling deeply in love. James was everything Ruby had never known she wanted in a partner. He was intelligent and ambitious, but also kind and supportive. He listened to her ideas and treated her as an equal partner in both business and life. He made her laugh, challenged her to think bigger, and supported her dreams even when they seemed impossible. But their relationship became fodder for more gossip when they started appearing together at public events. "Of course she's dating her business partner," Ruby overheard someone say at a startup showcase event. "How else do you think she got her position?" "Young, pretty, knows how to play the game," another voice added. "Smart girl." Ruby excused herself and went to the bathroom, where she stared at herself in the mirror and tried not to cry. No matter what she accomplished, some people would always assume she had taken shortcuts. The situation reached a breaking point when Ruby attended a charity gala for an organization that supported women entrepreneurs. She had bought a table for FarmConnect and invited several clients and partners to join them. Ruby wore an elegant black gown that she had saved up to buy, wanting to represent her company well at such an important event. During the cocktail hour, she was approached by a woman named Patricia Wells, who ran a successful public relations firm. "Ruby, darling, you look absolutely stunning," Patricia said, kissing Ruby's cheeks. "That dress must have cost a fortune." "Thank you," Ruby said, accepting the compliment but feeling wary of Patricia's tone. "You know, I've been following your story with great interest," Patricia continued. "Such an inspiring rise from humble beginnings to this level of success. FarmConnect has been very rewarding to build," Ruby said carefully. "Oh, I'm sure it has been. But tell me, what's your secret? How does a young woman with no connections and no family money manage to get this far so quickly?" Ruby felt her stomach tighten. The question sounded innocent enough, but the implication was clear. "Hard work, good ideas, and excellent partners," Ruby said firmly. "The same way anyone builds a successful business." Of course," Patricia said with a knowing smile. "Although I have to say, having the right mentors certainly doesn't hurt. James Richardson is quite the catch, brilliant businessman and handsome too." Ruby felt heat rising in her cheeks. "James is my business partner and co-founder of FarmConnect. Our success is based on the strength of our product and our team." "Naturally," Patricia said. "Although one does wonder about the nature of such close partnerships. But who am I to judge? Whatever works, right?" Ruby excused herself and walked quickly toward the bathroom, her hands shaking with anger and hurt. She locked herself in a stall and took deep breaths, trying to calm down before she had to return to the gala. When she finally composed herself and returned to the event, she found James looking for her with concern written across his face. "Are you okay? You look upset." Ruby glanced around at the room full of successful business people, many of whom she now suspected viewed her as nothing more than a pretty girl who had slept her way to success. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just tired." But as they sat through dinner and listened to speeches about supporting women entrepreneurs, Ruby couldn't shake the feeling that she would never be able to escape the assumptions people made about her. No matter how successful FarmConnect became, no matter how much she proved herself, there would always be whispers about how she really achieved her success. The irony was painful. She had worked harder than almost anyone she knew to build FarmConnect legitimately. She had started with nothing but an idea and had built it into a thriving business through intelligence, determination, and countless hours of work. But because she was young, black, and beautiful, some people couldn't believe her success was real. That night, as James drove her home from the gala, Ruby stared out the window at the city lights and wondered if all her success was worth the constant scrutiny and judgment. She had thought that proving herself would be enough, but she was beginning to realize that some people had already made up their minds about who she was and how she had gotten where she was. And unfortunately, things were about to get much worse. Despite the whispers and assumptions that followed Ruby wherever she went, her relationship with James continued to deepen in the quiet moments between their public appearances. Away from the scrutiny of business events and networking dinners, they discovered they fit together in ways that surprised them both. Their love story unfolded in small moments. James bringing Ruby coffee in the morning exactly how she liked it, with just enough cream to make it the color of caramel. Ruby staying late at the office to help him prepare for an important client presentation, even though she had finished her own work hours earlier. Long conversations about their dreams for Farm Connect, for themselves, and for the future they might build together. "I never expected this," Ruby told James one evening as they walked through Piedmont Park after a particularly long day at the office. The sun was setting behind the Atlanta skyline, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded Ruby of sunsets over her grandmother's farm. "What didn't you expect?" James asked, taking her hand as they found a bench overlooking the lake. "Any of it. The business success, working with you, falling in love." Ruby leaned against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body through his shirt. "A year ago, I was making coffee for minimum wage and wondering if I'd ever amount to anything." "You were always going to amount to something," James said softly. "I could see it the first day you told me about Farm Connect. You had this light in your eyes when you talked about helping farmers. You saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself," Ruby said. "That's what love does," James said, turning to face her. "It helps you see your own worth." They had been officially dating for 3 months, though they had been falling for each other much longer than that. James was patient with Ruby's fears about mixing business with romance, understanding her need to prove that their professional partnership could survive their personal relationship. At work, they maintained careful boundaries. They didn't hold hands in the office, didn't exchange romantic words during business meetings, and made sure their decision-making was always based on what was best for Farm Connect. But after hours, they allowed themselves to be simply Ruby and James, two people who had found something special together. James had grown up in Atlanta, the son of 2 teachers who had instilled in him the values of education and hard work. He had started his technology consulting business with money saved from his first job after college, building it slowly and carefully over 5 years. He was ambitious but not ruthless, successful but not arrogant. "What attracted you to me?" Ruby asked one night as they cooked dinner together in her apartment. She was making cornbread from her grandmother's recipe while James handled the main course. "Honestly?" James said, stirring a pot of jambalaya. "Your intelligence first. You saw problems and solutions that other people missed. But then I got to know your heart, how much you cared about helping people, and I was done for." "When did you know you were falling for me?" Ruby asked. "Remember that day we visited Sarah's farm in Decatur? You spent 3 hours talking to her about soil composition and pest management, and then you helped her figure out how to price her products to make a real profit. You were so focused on solving her problems that you got dirt all over your business clothes and didn't even notice." Ruby laughed, remembering the day. Sarah had become one of Farm Connect's most successful farmers, but she had started out struggling to make her organic vegetables profitable. "I knew then that you weren't just building a business," James continued. "You were building something that mattered to you personally. That's when I realized I was falling in love with you." Their relationship wasn't without challenges. Ruby struggled with trust issues, having grown up in a world where she had to be completely self-reliant. Learning to depend on someone else, to share her fears and dreams with another person, didn't come naturally to her. James had his own challenges. He had been in a long-term relationship before that had ended badly when his ex-girlfriend had cheated on him with a business partner. Learning to trust again, to believe that Ruby was with him for who he was rather than what he could provide, took time. But they worked through their issues together, talking honestly about their fears and supporting each other through difficult moments. James was patient when Ruby had panic attacks about the business, holding her while she worried that everything they had built might disappear. Ruby was understanding when James had bad days, when the stress of running a company and dealing with demanding clients got to him. "I love how hard you work," Ruby told him one evening after he had spent a client's website problems. "But I also love that you know when to stop and just be present." "I love your ambition," James said, pulling her close on the couch. "But I also love how you remember where you came from and why this all matters." They started making plans for the future. Not just for Farm Connect, but for their life together. They talked about expanding the platform to other states, about maybe buying a house together, about taking a vacation to some place warm where they could walk on the beach and forget about business for a while. "Do you ever want to go back to Georgia?" James asked one night as they lay in bed, Ruby's head on his chest. "To visit, yes. To live, probably not," Ruby said. "I love the city now. I love the opportunities here, the energy, the way you can build something from nothing." "But do you miss it? The quiet, the simplicity?" "I miss my grandmother," Ruby said quietly. "I miss knowing everyone in town and everyone knowing me. But I don't miss feeling like my whole life was planned out for me before I was even born." "What if we could have both?" James said. "What if we found a way to spend time in both places?" Ruby lifted her head to look at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we bought some land outside the city? Nothing huge, just a few acres where we could have a garden and some peace and quiet. Close enough to Atlanta that we could still run the business, but far enough out that we could remember what really matters." The idea appealed to Ruby more than she expected. She had always assumed that success meant leaving her rural roots completely behind, but maybe James was right. Maybe there was a way to honor both parts of herself, the ambitious businesswoman and the farm girl who understood the value of working with her hands. "I'd like that," she said, settling back against his chest. "I'd really like that." As Farm Connect continued to grow and their relationship deepened, Ruby began to feel like she had finally found her place in the world. She was building something meaningful with someone she loved, creating value for people she cared about, and proving that success could come from hard work and good ideas rather than shortcuts or compromises. But even as her personal life flourished, the whispers and assumptions about her continued to grow louder. People who didn't know her personally seemed determined to create a different story about how she had achieved her success. And soon, those whispers would threaten to destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. Ruby didn't know it yet, but her biggest test was still ahead of her. The confrontation with Tiana at the hotel was just the beginning. Soon, she would have to choose between protecting herself and protecting the business and relationship she had worked so hard to create. The love she had found with James would be tested in ways she never imagined. And Ruby would have to decide whether their quiet, growing love was strong enough to survive the storm that was coming. The crisis started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning in September. Ruby was at her desk, reviewing quarterly sales figures for Farm Connect, when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered anyway, thinking it might be a potential client. "Is this Ruby Johnson?" asked a woman's voice, professional but with an edge that made Ruby immediately wary. "Yes, this is Ruby. How can I help you?" "My name is Jennifer Walsh from the Atlanta Tribune. I'm working on a story about young entrepreneurs in the city, and your name came up. I was hoping to ask you a few questions." Ruby relaxed slightly. The Atlanta Tribune was a respected business publication, and positive coverage could be good for Farm Connect. "I'd be happy to talk," Ruby said. "What would you like to know?" "Well, there's been some discussion in business circles about the rapid growth of Farm Connect. Some people are wondering how a young woman with no business experience and no family money managed to secure significant investment funding so quickly." Ruby felt her stomach tighten. The question was phrased politely, but the implication was clear. "I secured funding based on the strength of my business plan and the market opportunity that Farm Connect addresses," Ruby said carefully. "My partners and I have worked very hard to build something valuable." "Of course," Jennifer said smoothly. "But there are also questions about your relationship with James Richardson. Some sources suggest that your business partnership might be more personal than professional." "James and I are co-founders of Farm Connect," Ruby said, her voice getting sharper. "Our personal relationship developed after we established our business partnership, and it has no bearing on the company's success." "I see. And what would you say to sources who claim that you're essentially a kept woman, using your relationship with Richardson to fund a lifestyle you couldn't otherwise afford?" Ruby felt like she had been slapped. I would say that those sources don't know what they're talking about. Every dollar I've earned has been through legitimate business activities. But you have to admit that the optics are concerning. A young woman from a poor background, suddenly living a luxury lifestyle, dating her older, successful business partner. This conversation is over, Ruby said, hanging up the phone with shaking hands. James was in a client meeting, but Ruby texted him urgently, "Need to talk to you ASAP." Reporter called asking inappropriate questions. 20 minutes later, James appeared at her desk, concern written across his face. "What happened?" he asked, sitting down beside her. Ruby told him about the phone call, watching his expression grow darker with each detail. "She actually accused you of being a kept woman?" James said, his voice tight with anger. "Not in those exact words, but yes. She made it sound like I'm using you for money and status." James was quiet for a moment, processing the information. "Ruby, I'm so sorry. This is my fault." "How is this your fault?" "I should have anticipated this. I should have realized that our relationship would be used against you. In this business, people always look for ways to diminish successful women, especially young black women." "So what do we do?" Ruby asked. "First, we call our lawyer. Then we prepare a statement with facts about FarmConnect's development and your role in the company. And then we decide whether to respond publicly or let this blow over." But the story didn't blow over. 3 days later, the Atlanta Tribune published an article titled, "Questions Surround Young Entrepreneurs' Rapid Rise." The article was carefully worded to avoid outright accusations, but it raised questions about Ruby's background, her relationship with James, and the circumstances of FarmConnect's funding. The article included quotes from unnamed sources suggesting that Ruby was inexperienced, and that her success was unprecedented for someone with her background. It mentioned her expensive clothes and jewelry, implying that her lifestyle didn't match her stated income. Most damaging of all, it suggested that investors might have been influenced by factors other than the business plan when deciding to fund FarmConnect. The response was swift and brutal. The article was shared widely on social media, with comments that ranged from skeptical to outright vicious. Business contacts who had previously been friendly suddenly became distant. Several restaurant clients called to postpone their contracts with FarmConnect pending clarification of the situation. Ruby's phone rang constantly with calls from other reporters wanting to follow up on the story. She stopped answering unknown numbers, but that didn't stop the speculation from growing. "This is a hit job," Lisa said during an emergency team meeting. "Someone wanted to damage Ruby's reputation and they found a way to do it." "But who would want to do that?" Ruby asked. "And why?" "Could be a competitor," James suggested. FarmConnect is taking market share from traditional food distributors. Some of them have a lot of money and influence. Or it could be someone who just can't stand to see a young black woman succeed, Lisa added bluntly. "There are plenty of those people in the business world." The situation got worse when Patricia Wells, the PR executive who had made the snide comments at the charity gala, published a blog post titled, "The Real Story Behind the Farm Girl Fantasy." In it, she detailed her interaction with Ruby at the gala and suggested that Ruby's response to questions had been evasive and suspicious. "Young women who achieve sudden success often have benefactors behind the scenes," Patricia wrote. While there's nothing wrong with using all available resources to get ahead, the public has a right to know the truth about the businesses they're being asked to support. Ruby read the blog post in her apartment late one night, tears streaming down her face. James sat beside her on the couch, his arm around her shoulders, trying to provide comfort in an impossible situation. "She's basically calling me a prostitute," Ruby said, her voice breaking. "She's saying I sold myself to get where I am." "She's not saying that explicitly," James said, though his jaw was tight with anger. "She's implying it, which is actually worse because she can deny responsibility for what people infer." "What if this ruins everything?" Ruby asked. What if we lose Farm Connect because of these lies? That's not going to happen, James said firmly. We have contracts, we have revenue, we have a real business with real value. They can't take that away with gossip. But Ruby wasn't sure he was right. In the business world, reputation mattered as much as results. If enough people believed the rumors, it could destroy everything they had built. The breaking point came when Ruby received a call from Margaret Chen at Sustain Tech Ventures. "Ruby, I need to talk to you about the recent media coverage," Margaret said without preamble. "Our board is concerned about the potential impact on FarmConnect's reputation. The coverage is based on false allegations and innuendo," Ruby said. "There's no substance to any of it." "I believe you," Margaret said. "But perception matters in this business. We need to consider whether it might be better for everyone if you step back from the public-facing aspects of the business for a while." Ruby felt like the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. "You want me to step down?" "Not permanently. Just until this blows over. James could handle the public relations side of things while you focus on product development behind the scenes." "Absolutely not," Ruby said, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. "I won't be pushed into hiding because some people can't accept that I built this company legitimately. Ruby, be practical. Sometimes the best way to protect what you've built is to make strategic compromises. The compromise you're suggesting would prove that the rumors are true," Ruby said. "If I step back now, everyone will assume I was pushed out because the allegations were valid." After she hung up, Ruby sat in her office staring at the wall. Everything she had worked for was at risk because of lies and innuendo. But she realized something important in that moment: she would rather lose everything than admit to something she hadn't done. That afternoon, Ruby called a press conference. Against the advice of her lawyer and despite James's concerns about making things worse, she decided to tell her story publicly and completely. Standing in front of a room full of reporters and cameras, wearing a simple black dress and her grandmother's gold cross necklace, Ruby took a deep breath and began to speak. "My name is Ruby Johnson, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of FarmConnect. Over the past week, there have been questions raised about my background, my business, and my relationship with my business partner. I'm here today to answer those questions completely and honestly." For the next 20 minutes, Ruby told her story. She talked about growing up on her grandmother's farm, about losing everything when her grandmother got sick, about arriving in Atlanta with nothing but determination and a dream. She detailed every step of FarmConnect's development, from the initial idea to the first investors to the current success. She talked about her relationship with James, explaining how it had developed naturally over time and emphasizing that it had never influenced business decisions or funding arrangements. Most importantly, she shared financial documents that proved every dollar she had earned had come from legitimate business activities. She showed bank statements, investment records, and salary information that demonstrated exactly how she could afford her current lifestyle. "I'm not ashamed of my success," Ruby said, looking directly into the cameras. "I worked hard for it, I earned it honestly, and I won't apologize for it. If people can't accept that a young black woman from a farm background can build a successful business through intelligence and hard work, that says more about them than it does about me." The questions afterward were tough, but Ruby answered each one calmly and thoroughly. She provided documents to support every claim, gave contact information for references who could verify her story, and challenged anyone who doubted her to examine the evidence. When the press conference ended, Ruby felt exhausted but liberated. She had told the truth completely, and now it was up to the world to decide whether they would believe her or continue to prefer the lies. The response to Ruby's press conference was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the video had been shared thousands of times across social media platforms. Business leaders, fellow entrepreneurs, and customers began speaking out in support of Ruby and FarmConnect. Sarah, the organic farmer from Decatur who had become one of FarmConnect's first success stories, posted a video testimonial about how Ruby had personally helped her build her business. "Ruby didn't just create a platform," Sarah said. She spent hours teaching me about pricing, marketing, and business planning. She genuinely cares about helping farmers succeed. Other farmers and restaurant owners shared similar stories. Chef Marcus Williams from a popular Atlanta restaurant talked about how Farm Connect had revolutionized his supply chain. "Ruby and her team understand both sides of the business," he said. "They've created something that actually works because they took the time to understand what we needed." Even more powerful were the messages from young women entrepreneurs who saw Ruby as an inspiration. They shared their own stories of being questioned, doubted, and diminished because of their age, race, or gender. Ruby's refusal to be silenced resonated with women across the country who had faced similar challenges. The tide of public opinion shifted decisively in Ruby's favor when the Atlanta Tribune published a follow-up article apologizing for the original piece. An investigation had revealed that many of the unnamed sources quoted in the original article had ties to traditional food distribution companies that competed with Farm Connect. "We failed to adequately verify our sources and allowed ourselves to be used to spread unsubstantiated rumors," the Tribune's editor wrote. Ms. Johnson deserves both an apology and recognition for the legitimate business success she has achieved. Patricia Wells quietly deleted her blog post, but not before screenshots had been saved and shared widely as an example of how successful women are often attacked. The business impact was even more positive than the public relations victory. Farm Connect gained hundreds of new users in the week following Ruby's press conference. Restaurant owners and farmers who had heard about the platform through the media coverage signed up to show their support. Margaret Chen called to apologize and confirmed that Sustaintech Ventures remained fully committed to their investment. "The board was impressed by how you handled the crisis," she said. "Standing up for yourself and your business took courage, and it proved that Farm Connect is in good hands." But the most meaningful response came from Tiana, who called Ruby 2 weeks after the press conference. "I saw your speech," Tiana said, her voice thick with emotion. "Ruby, I'm so sorry. I said terrible things to you at that hotel, and I was completely wrong." Ruby felt tears starting to form. "Tiana. No, let me finish. I was jealous and hurt that you had moved on to this amazing new life, and I took out my feelings on you instead of being proud of what you accomplished. You were my best friend, and I should have known you better than anyone. I understand why you thought what you thought," Ruby said. "From the outside, it did look like I had gotten successful too quickly. But I should have known you," Tiana said. "I should have known that if anyone could build something from nothing through pure hard work, it would be you. Your grandmother raised you right, and I should have trusted that." They talked for an hour, rebuilding their friendship and filling in the gaps of the past 2 years. Tiana was still working at the processing plant, but she had started taking night classes in business administration, inspired by Ruby's success. "I want to visit you in Atlanta," Tiana said. "I want to see Farm Connect and meet James and understand this life you've built." "I'd love that," Ruby said. "And Tiana? I want to help you with whatever you're planning. Maybe Farm Connect could use someone with your experience in food processing." After the crisis passed, Ruby and James were stronger than ever. The stress of defending their business and relationship had tested them both, but it had also shown them how much they meant to each other. "I was so proud of you during that press conference," James told her one evening as they walked through the same park where they had first talked about their feelings. "You could have backed down, could have let me handle it, but you stood up and fought for what was yours." "What was ours," Ruby corrected. "I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for us, for Farm Connect, for every young woman who might face the same challenges someday." James stopped walking and turned to face her. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, and Ruby thought about how much her life had changed since that first terrifying day in Atlanta. "Ruby," James said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "There's something I want to ask you." He pulled out a small velvet box and dropped to one knee right there on the park path. Ruby's hands flew to her mouth as she realized what was happening. "Ruby Johnson," James said, opening the box to reveal a beautiful diamond ring. You are the smartest, strongest, most amazing woman I've ever known. You've made me a better businessman, a better partner, and a better man. Will you marry me? Ruby looked down at the man she loved, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 2 years ago, she had been a scared farm girl with nothing but dreams and determination. Now she was a successful entrepreneur, about to marry her business partner and best friend. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, absolutely yes. James slipped the ring onto her finger and stood up to kiss her as other park visitors applauded around them. The ring was perfect, elegant but not ostentatious, classic but with modern touches that reflected who Ruby had become. That night, they called their families and friends. James's parents welcomed Ruby warmly, telling her they had been hoping for this moment since James first started talking about his brilliant business partner. Ruby called Tiana, who screamed so loudly that Ruby had to hold the phone away from her ear. I'm going to be your maid of honor, right? Tiana demanded. And you're having the wedding in Georgia so I can help plan everything? We haven't talked about details yet, Ruby laughed. We just got engaged 3 hours ago. But as she said it, Ruby realized she did want to get married in Georgia. Not on her grandmother's old farm, which belonged to someone else now, but somewhere that honored her roots while celebrating her future. Over the following months, as they planned their wedding and continued to grow Farm Connect, Ruby felt like her life had finally come full circle. She had kept her promise to her grandmother to make something beautiful of her life, but she had also found a way to honor where she came from. Farm Connect expanded to 5 states, helping hundreds of farmers increase their income while providing restaurants and consumers with fresh, local ingredients. Ruby hired Tiana as their operations manager for food safety and processing, bringing her best friend into the business that had changed everything. The wedding took place on a beautiful October day at a restored plantation house outside Atlanta that had been converted into an event space focused on sustainable agriculture education. Ruby wore her grandmother's pearl necklace with her wedding dress, and James's vows included a promise to always support her dreams, no matter how big they seemed. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Ruby looked around at their guests, farmers and restaurateurs, investors and entrepreneurs, old friends from Georgia and new friends from Atlanta. She thought about her grandmother, who would have been so proud to see how her baby girl had grown. What are you thinking about? James whispered as they swayed to the music. Just that a year ago, people were calling me a gold digger and questioning everything about my success, Ruby said. Now here we are, married and building something amazing together. Do you ever regret it? James asked. The scrutiny, the pressure, the way people judged us. Ruby thought about the question seriously. The past year had been difficult in ways she had never expected. Success had brought challenges she hadn't anticipated, and being in the public eye had cost her privacy and peace of mind. But looking around at their wedding reception, seeing the joy on the faces of the farmers whose lives had been changed by Farm Connect, thinking about the young women who had reached out to her for advice and inspiration, Ruby knew her answer. Never, she said firmly. Every challenge was worth it to build something real and meaningful. And every bit of judgment was worth it to find you. As the song ended and their guests applauded, Ruby felt a deep sense of completion. She had started as a farm girl with big dreams and had become a successful entrepreneur with an even bigger future ahead of her. She had proven that success could come from hard work and good ideas, that love could grow slowly and steadily like crops in good soil, and that the truth was always worth fighting for, no matter how difficult the battle might be. The diamond necklace that had caused so much trouble early in her journey now sat in her jewelry box at home, a reminder of how far she had come. But the simple gold cross that had been her grandmother's that she wore every day, whether she was dressed for business meetings or working in the garden behind their new house outside the city. Ruby had learned that transformation didn't mean abandoning who you were. It meant growing into who you were meant to become. And as she danced with her husband under the stars, surrounded by people who loved and supported them, Ruby knew that this was exactly who she was meant to be.